wealth doesn't trickle down. It is siphoned up from the labor of the many into the pockets of the few. I don't like great concentrations of private wealth because it causes public poverty. Corporate wealth is the greatest single cause of poverty. It is theft, and it makes a mockery of democracy. In fact, in every society where you have wealth, you have poverty. That's how you get wealth, by creating poverty. That's how the slave owner could live in such opulence and luxury, by having slaves who work at a bare subsistence and create this for him. That's how the feudal lords could live with their refineries and luxuries and their tables laden and groaning with food, by having serfs and servants working and producing this. And in the societies where you don't have great concentrations of wealth, you generally don't have mass poverty, or very little of it. It's a very interesting correlation. Wealth causes poverty, and that's what I got against wealth.
These South China factory workers range in age from 12 to 13 to 16 years old. They are cranking out Christmas ornaments for Walmart customers, charges human rights advocate the National Labor Committee.
The reality behind these bargains is so ugly that the American people would be terrified and upset and saddened to see it.
The group claims to have work records smuggled out of the factory showing that at 26 cents an hour, some of these workers make only half of China's legal minimum wage. The median pay for a 110-hour work week is $49.29. And for the 8 months leading up to the Christmas shopping season, the work week is 7 days long.
You have now products being made for export to the United States in factories overseas under conditions that would be embarrassing to Ebenezer Scrooge.
We economic hitmen have managed to create the world's first truly global empire, and it's basically a secret empire. We do it many ways, but principally we identify a country that has resources our corporations covet, like oil, arrange a huge loan to that country from the World Bank or one of its sisters. The money never actually goes to the country. It goes to our own corporations to build big infrastructure projects in that country that help a few very wealthy people, but don't benefit the majority of the people who are too poor to buy electricity or have cars to drive on the highways, and yet they're left holding a huge debt that they can't repay. So we go back at some point and say, you know, you can't pay your debts. Give us a pound of flesh. Sell your oil real cheap to our oil companies. Vote with us on the next critical UN vote. Allow us to build a military base in your backyard. Something along these lines. And when we fail, the jackals go in and either overthrow or assassinate these leaders. And if the jackals fail, as they did in Iraq, then we send in the military. I don't think the failure is capitalism. I think it's a specific kind of capitalism that we've developed. We've created what I consider a mutant, viral form of capitalism. And this mutant form of capitalism, which I think is really a predatory form of capitalism, has created an extremely unstable, unsustainable, unjust, and very, very dangerous world. I've met a lot of terrorists. I've interviewed them for books. I've never met one who wanted to be a terrorist. They're desperate people. If we want to get rid of terrorism, we must get rid of the root causes, that cancer that is destroying our whole system. Because I think it's really important that we understand today we cannot have homeland security unless we understand that the whole planet is our homeland.
So in a sense, what we're seeing is using branding that is so enmeshed in our culture and in our lives as a way back into our own societies, a way to engage with globalization. Because if you pick up a shoe now, you have the story of globalization in your hand. You have leather that was maybe produced in Argentina, shipped to the Philippines, produced by a Korean subcontractor that went through a Hong Kong broker that was dealing with a company in Oregon. So you're looking at this thing, and if you can deconstruct it, if you can trace all the components through the global economy, and not only that, but find out how much that company that's selling you that shoe spent on advertising last year and how much money they paid a superstar athlete to sponsor them, then you have the disparities of the global economy in miniature, the winners and the losers. What we've seen in the past 6 years is an explosion of brand-based investigative activism, where you have campaigners that have peeled or looked behind the brand, peeled away the facade to see how the goods are produced. There are labor groups in the United States that have sponsored tours of Nike workers, of Gap workers, going to U.S. campuses, to community centers, to tell people how their products are produced. And of course, this is very uncomfortable for these companies, because even though they are the engines of globalization, they don't really believe in globalization, not this kind of globalization, right? I mean, their whole system depends on the world of production and the world of consumption staying safely apart, and there not being this connection at the grassroots where we learn the secrets behind our shiny, perfect, airbrushed global world. So now these brands have become, in many ways, the most visible targets of globalization, so much so that whenever you see a protest, during a protest, there'll be a line of riot cops guarding the Starbucks, guarding the Gap, guarding the McDonald's. And this strikes me as tremendously symbolic, somehow, that they're guarding the facade, the entry point into the world of globalization. And what this activism is doing is it's putting them together. And it's going to the shiny facade of the brand outside the mall, outside the superstore, and saying, we know how your products are produced. That's what these campaigns do. They make globalization real. They say it's about the food that you eat, it's about the clothes that you wear, it's about the toys you buy your kids.
States. And what we have created is what the political philosopher Sheldon Wolin calls a system of inverted totalitarianism, which is different from classical forms of totalitarianism. It's not built around a demagogue or a charismatic leader, but finds expression in the anonymity of the corporate state. And in inverted totalitarianism, he argues, you don't have a revolutionary force that seeks to tear down decaying structures and replace them with new structures. They speak in the iconography and language of patriotism, of the Constitution, and yet have so corrupted the internal levers of power as to render the citizenry impotent.
A couple years ago, and this guy afterwards said, you know, you talk a lot about this culture being based on violence, but I don't see it. You know, I'm not violent. And I said, okay, first off, where's your shirt made? And he looked and it was made in Bangladesh. It's like, look, do we even need to talk about that?
He's fucking faking he's dead. Yeah, he's breathing. He's faking he's fucking dead. Yeah, he was playing.
Our way of living, industrial civilization, is based on, requires, and will collapse very quickly without persistent and widespread violence.
Absolutely, John. You're going to want to give us a call up to get this beautiful Hope diamond necklace. This is a 45.52 carat diamond surrounded by 16 white diamonds. It has a platinum chain bearing 46 more diamonds.
These are 12 4-ounce Southern barbecue chicken breasts. These stuffed and gourmet farm fresh chicken breasts come from their barnyard to your backyard. They're wonderfully marinated and guaranteed to be tender, juicy, and downright delicious.
Fine-tune those measurements. We keep them on file. They're saved there on our computer. Go back into the section where you reorder and fine-tune those measurements for us. And then we'll have a chance to send you another pair of customized jeans that we really believe are going to fit perfectly.
Second, I said, okay, do you pay rent? He's like, yeah. And I said, why? And he said, because I don't own. And I said, no, what would happen if you didn't pay rent? He said, well, the sheriff would come and evict me. I said, I don't know what that means. What would happen? He said, well, the sheriff would come and he would knock on the door. I said, okay, great. What happens if you open the door and you say, hey, I'm just finishing up making dinner. You want some? And so the sheriff sits down, you feed him, you don't poison him. And then after dinner, you say, well, you know, you've been somewhat pleasant company, but not all that pleasant, so I would like for you to leave my home now. What would happen? He said, well, the sheriff would pull out his gun and he'd say, I'm here to evict you because you didn't pay rent. I said, so the reason you pay rent is because if you don't, some guy with a gun is going to come and take you away.
He said, I think I get it. I said, let's try again.
What happens if you're hungry, so you go to the grocery store and you start eating? What's going to happen? So we're going to call the sheriff. I said, yeah, it's the same guy who's going to come with a gun and take you away. He's a real asshole, isn't he? So one of the reasons we don't see a lot of the violence is because it's exported. And another reason we don't see a lot of the violence is because we've been so metabolized into the system that we bought into this strange notion that it's okay to have to pay to exist on the planet. That's really, really weird. And if you don't pay, then some guy with a gun is going to come and bad things are going to happen to you.
Well, we did see this week these Occupy movements all across the country. They were commemorating the 2-month anniversary of when the whole Occupy Wall Street movement started. We saw arrests take place in New York and saw really a big showing across the country. We also saw some scuffles and some back and forth between a lot of demonstrators and the police. Take a look at this one. Now, a lot of people are outraged by this video. You see some of the protesters and demonstrators essentially sitting on the ground, but then being pepper sprayed by a police officer. This is at the University of California at Davis. Now, they refused to move tents they had set up. They occupy the campus. They're upset over rising tuition costs. Now, police are defending their actions here. They say they were concerned for their own safety, and that's why they had to use that pepper spray.
I'm Chris Hedges. I'm a writer. I write books. I spent 20 years overseas as a war correspondent. Came back and realized that corporations had carried out a coup d'etat in my country. And I've been fighting back, although not as effectively as you guys. Well, I've covered movements. I've covered all of the revolutions in Eastern Europe. I covered the street demonstrations that brought down Milosevic. I've covered both of the Palestinian intifadas, and once movements like this start and articulate a fundamental truth about the society that they live in, and expose the repression, the mendacity, the corruption, and the decay of the structures of power, then they have a kind of centrifugal force. You never know where they're going. You know, I was with the leaders of the movement, the opposition movement in East Germany in Leipzig on the afternoon of November 9th, 1989, and they said that perhaps within a year there would be free passage back and forth across the Berlin Wall. In a few hours, the Berlin Wall didn't exist. What happens is, in all of these movements, this was true in Prague as well, is that the foot soldiers of the elite, the blue uniform police, the mechanisms of control finally don't want to impede the movement. And at that point, the power elite is left defenseless. So where's it going? No one knows. Even the people most intimately involved in the organization don't know. All of these movements take on a kind of life and color that is in some ways finally mysterious. The only thing I can say, having been in the middle of similar movements, is that this one is real, and this one could take them all down.
What up, all power to the people. This is Stickman from Dead Presidents. Our new track, Globalization, Scene of the Crime, available on 836 Volume 1.
Globalization really means the globalization of capital. You don't hear people talking about the globalization of labor. But you know, working people all around the world have more in common with each other than they have with their own so-called leaders or the rulers, the ruling class, that is, of those societies. So people should globalize resistance. Globalize, and that means globalization.
Some kids get bombs for breakfast and blowed away on their birthday. Asked a little orphan boy on Iraqi soil what he think about the USA. Today was the worst day of his life. Uncle Sam killed both his parents. His village was burned to the ground and they left him and his little brother to perish. Cause they want the oil in the soil. Like vampires, they come for blood. In the name of freedom and justice, nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. First they send the soldiers, then come McDonald's and Coca-Cola. Toxic Western culture. Once they take over, it's over. Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Halliburton, 7 Up, Walmart, Exxon. Who cares if you get stepped on? Get stepped on in the name of progress. They business has no conscience. All they want is profits. It's obvious in Africa, it's obvious in Mexico, it's obvious in Cuba, it's obvious in Palestine. American invasion, foreign occupation, covert